Welcome, everybody, to Something to Talk About, our Senior Center programs, which we do Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. They're sponsored by Fieldstone Communities on Bainbridge Island, and you can call 360-689-4314 to schedule a tour of Fieldstone's apartments on Rolling Bay. And I would also like to acknowledge that we are on the land, the ancestral land of the Suquamish people, the people of clear salt water. Expert fishermen, canoe builders, and basket weavers, the Suquamish have lived in harmony with the lands and waterways along Washington's Central Salish Sea as they have for thousands of years. Here, the Suquamish live and protect the land and waters of their ancestors for future generations, as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. So welcome, very much welcome, Akuyea Karen Vargas and Debbie Haase, who are both amazing peacemongers, makers of peace, weavers of peace, people who bring peace into many challenging and difficult conversations. And I'm hoping today we get to hear some stories about that and learn some tips and techniques about how to be peace and practice peace in tough, complicated situations. Akuyea, you're just back from a Truth and Reconciliation mission, really, right? Do you want to say a little bit about that?
It's just an awesome opportunity to have gone over to Rome and Israel, to Bethlehem, to Turkey, over to those regions to really talk about how do we move into truth and reconciliation. That mean, and understanding when there's conflict, how do we to move that into healing and reconciling that broken, because a lot of it is comes from broken trust and a lot of it conflict. And so how do we move into space of repair and healing? And I think it's important that the playing field with the work that needs to happen when it comes down to true reconciliation and peacemaking, even in our own homes and so that's kind of, that was a kind of mission that I had going over.
That's a pretty enormous mission. Thank you. Wow. And Debbie, I know you have been to Palestine and Israel too, working with a peacemaking mission, kind of, right?
Yeah, I went with the Compassionate Listening Project delegation to Israel and Palestine. I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago. And also a delegation that went to Alabama a couple of years ago and had a chance to really work at healing from the place of listening with a whole group that have super open hearts, and creating that atmosphere that really allows for some healing to happen when people's are deeply listened to and their humanity is seen. I think that's, when I think about healing, there's a saying, I don't know, Cheryl Richardson, people start to heal the moment they feel heard. And I witnessed that over and over again in my life. And it seems sort of simple, but it's not so simple. Yeah.
Well, partly I think because we tend to get into these heated conversations, or let's say arguments, or, and we're not listening. We're just waiting for a chance to tell somebody how wrong they are. And it's like holding yourself open to that listening. I think that is really actually not that easy. Maybe both of you could say a little bit about how you've learned to do that, how you've taught yourself to do that.
Well, one of the things that I've learned is if we're going to step into a place of healing, it's important we don't come in a mode of conflict. And I'll say it like that. If you come in the door fighting, you're going to fight. That's what I say. If you're ready to fight, the fight is already on. But if you're ready to come in and you're ready to heal some of the harm and heal history and be able, like Debbie said, to be able to hear one another and to be able to listen and to be able to acknowledge, to be able to acknowledge when we've done the harm. That's huge, to be able to step into being able to ask forgiveness and to acknowledge when we have been the one that have caused the harm, and understanding that, sometimes from our own perspective, we might ourselves as not the offender, and understand to hear from the other side or the other individual felt about what we might have said and what we might, and to be able to sit in that space and without jumping to the point where, wait a minute, well, you did this to me and you blah, here it is, we going blow to blow again, and to just sit with what is being said and to be able to hear is very important in the healing process.
So yeah, it sounds like, and Debbie, maybe you can weigh in on this. It's like keeping our defensiveness strapped down, or acknowledging it and patting it on the head and asking it to wait a while or something. Like, how does that work? That we, because it is triggering, right?
It's totally activating. And like you're saying, Akuyea, if you come in fighting, there's going to be a fight. And so for me, in my experience, the biggest work I can do is is center myself and be in my heart, so that when I walk into a space, or not even when I walk into a space, when I'm in it, like you were talking about, when harm happens, when I create harm, how do I not, rather than think about other people, how do I not get defensive? What do I do so that I can just center and really honestly acknowledge and take responsibility for something I said? And so it comes down to this inner work. What I call inner work is a big part of it for me, is learning and practicing how to center, how to be in my heart, really, and recognize when I'm not. So that's the first step. Recognize when I'm not.
Yeah, because it's true. Because sometimes you're like, I'm fine. I'm very calm. And then
Right.
or perhaps not,
Yeah.
but recognizing our own edges and being sort of gentle with them, but also saying, you don't get to run the show, because otherwise the show is over very quickly, right? It's like, but that practice, you talk about inner work, I think that is not necessarily so easy or simple, right? Like,
Right.
how do we practice acknowledging our own feelings, but not letting them spill out, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I have to say one of my greatest teachers was was my mom, taking care of her in her last years when she was really quite difficult, but learning that if I wanted to be who I wanted to be, I needed to learn a different set of responses and let them be the ones I used, instead of the quick snapback one that was pretty tempting sometimes, right? But that keep working it and keep working it. And I have to say, there were a few amazing situations where something came up and something very provocative was said. And I found coming out of my mouth this kind, wise thing. And I'd almost look behind my shoulder to see who said it, because it's not what I was going to say. But if we do work it and try really hard to be the person we want to be, it can really change. Rita, you want to jump in with something?
I wanted to say that probably one of the closest places that we can practice what you're talking about, Debbie, is within our own families. And there is just so much that can go on and has gone on. But when we can be the one who is just listening and not being defensive and just try to understand that, so that there's always daily that we can practice being peaceful or making peace. So that's what I was going to say. It's great. I mean, there's so many things worldwide and in our communities, but within our own families, getting that to a place where there's peace and you can be safe, I think is one of the a really important thing that we can all do for ourselves and for our community.
Well, and especially around these holiday times when sometimes families get together and, you know, there's elections and there's all kinds of stresses around money and, you know, that kind of stuff. It can be very tricky. Akuyea, do you want to jump in with that?
Well, you know, I'm glad we're talking about that, making peace, and it starts home. You know, it really does start at home, and at home start first, because, you know, if you have within yourself about things that have transpired, that have happened, whether it's with your family members or in your job or anywhere, when you carry that, what I say, the, you know, when you're in a of bitterness and unforgiveness and hatred and all of those things out of us before we can even step into that place to make peace with others, because we're still of what I call poison. And when we cannot step into that place of health and calm, I think always has to start with us personally, to a place where we're healthy enough to move making and move healing into a good, because I have experience in my own, even when through conflict resolution and, you know, sitting down and having some healing circles, that, you know, where I go. And if I'm carrying this in my own heart, it is going to affect the environments that I walk into. And so I always do a lot of self-reflection, and I always do a lot of soul searching, and you know, asking myself, Karen, why are you so mad? Why are you so upset? Why are you being triggered by all of these things? And to be able to sit with that with myself, and then being able to communicate that in a way that I can be heard, but also that I'm not perpetuating what with on the inside. That's very the conflict. We perpetuate the conflict. So,
right, and we can carry it with us right into the room, right? So Debbie, what can you tell us about some of the practices of compassionate listening that kind of help create that calm or help us not be so reactive?
Well, Akuyea is talking about a lot of it, that reflection. But in the Compassionate Listening Project, we often talk, I mean, keywords are healing from the inside out, and then speaking from the heart and listening from the heart. And so it's practices of being in your heart space. And what I mean by that, and just calming, but even visualizing, you know, for me, putting my hand on my heart, because I'm a body kinesthetic person, and, you know, a few slow, deep breaths, and bringing my awareness, my focus and my attention to my heart, and even rubbing it, you know, giving myself a little, you know, a little love, so that I can then, you know, share that, bringing myself into that heart space through meditation, mindfulness practices, and visualizations and prayer help me a lot. And there's just so many heart practices. There's anyhow, I could go on, but I'll stop there.
Well, but I think some of those practices are exactly, it's one thing to read about it, but it's another thing to kind of bring it home and do it, right? And I think, go ahead.
Yeah, so the time to practice it is not when you're in the heat of something. So it helps me to try to practice it when nothing's going on or when the small things are going on, so that it kind of almost becomes part of who I am. I'm not saying I'm not at all saying I'm perfect at this or even good at it, but where there's some skill there. Yeah.
Well, but it is, it's sort of like our essential nature. I think essential human nature really is kind. And it gets covered over by so much social construct and so much conditioning. And so I think it's not that anybody's perfect. Lord knows we're not. But I think listening to that, what the Quakers call the still small voice within, your heart voice, and saying, oh, this is who I want to be in the world. Or this is not who I want to be in the world. And trying to really hear that. But I think the listening part is challenging in a way because we're such a quick culture, right? And sometimes I've been in conversations where somebody says something. If I don't respond immediately, they'll say, well, did you even hear what I said? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I was thinking about it. But it's like I'm learning that we need to let people know we heard. And is that part of the, the listening skill?
Yeah. Oh, you're talking to me.
Right.
Yeah, in compassion. Well, you brought up, I forget what your word you just used, but for me, it helps to really listen in that space of the heart. If I look at the other person in their humanity, but you talked about like all the conditioning and things that happens to people. And for me, it helps me when I think about if somebody is doing something, I'm not going to condone bad behavior, but I can think about they must have some difficult situations, some wounding in there. And I'm going to try to just like see through that and see that goodness that you said, you believe everybody has that goodness. But listening skills, what helps me, one of the skills in compassionate listening is called reflective listening. And so when somebody speaks, you can reflect a few things. We call it facts, feelings, values, and body language. But you don't have to do all of that. But somebody can really feel heard if you just reflect, like they're talking about something and like, oh, it sounds like you might be really sad. And they're like, yeah, well, no, I'm really angry. And then all of a sudden, a little reflection like that will help a person feel really heard. Or it sounds like it's really important to you, like connection is really important to you, a value. And then they can feel seen. People feel seen a lot more if there's a little bit of a reflection rather than a response. And you try to give them opinions and suggestions, or you go into your story instead, but just a little bit to show that they've been seen.
I think that makes me think a little bit about those days when we would all say, what I hear you say, and it could get really annoying, but I think it's different if we're doing it mechanically and different if we're doing it from genuine listening when you actually hear what somebody's saying. Akuyea, you are brilliant at that. Do you want to say a little about how you learned to be such an incredible deep listener?
I think it is very important for us to be able to quiet ourselves, to be able to hear others. So many times when things are being said, we're in our mind processing what we're going to respond and say and how we're going to react to it, instead of just quieting ourselves enough to listen deeply to what is being said. And you have to hear the offense. I think when we don't listen for how the individual feels like they or harm. And for us to be able to go to the core root of how everything began to get out of control. And I think that it's a true thing, because I think within us is want to put up this defense instead of being able to be vulnerable here. I mean, because so many times even when we go into a place of conflict resolution or sitting down or trying to get to the root of what might have gone on, that we sometimes go into it already ready to have an answer back for what somebody might be calling you out on, instead of being able to sit there and hear from them how they felt in the midst of what was going on and how they were harmed in that, and to acknowledge a difficult time acknowledging and taking responsibility. Have been a part of that, and we were in the midst of a conflict, and to say, forgive me, can I have offended? And everybody got all upset that I asked forgiveness. One that wanted to ensure that the individuals heard any of this conflict, please forgive me. I want what I have done to cause. And honey, that blew up. I was like, whoa.
I think when there's too much damage, it's not, just will, it's like able. Sometimes people are literally not able to be vulnerable enough to listen or to even acknowledge that you're listening.
Yeah.
That can be really difficult. And, I keep thinking about how this is one of the most stressful times in our lifetimes, for sure. I mean, the pandemic left everybody, I think we all have PTSD personally. Now there's the economy difficulties, there's the elections, there's political shenanigans, there's just, climate, there's everything you can think of. And then on top of that, there might be these interpersonal or historic or ancient wounds. And so it's not like small stuff. This is pretty major stuff. But I feel like we still have the work ahead of us and we still can do something. Debbie, you're nodding. What would you say to that?
Oh, wow. Well, that's a big question. We can still do something about all these things you named. I think it's a really big question. I think for me, it's all the little things, because I can't, I'm learning more and more through Akuyea, actually, as a mentor, is how we do things together and in collaboration and collectively. And so when you ask me that question, like, what could I do? Or maybe that's how I heard it. It was like, no, it's really about the we. What and how can we work and move together? And I'm experiencing, I've always appreciated, like the synergy when more than one, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But in these last couple of years, working with Akuyea in Kitsepi Race and seeing what that group does, that's relationship based and gets a lot of stuff done. I just think it's working together on one thing at a time. And they could be little things but they're not little, right? They add up. And anyhow, that's where.
No, and I apologize because I didn't mean to say you could solve all these things. I think what I was trying to say is we're all preloaded. Like
Oh,
we come
yeah.
in with just these multiple stresses, and I don't think anybody can fix that. But I think being aware that whatever what it looks like a cause might be just a piece of it, that there's probably a lot more going on. And that's where I think, the trying so hard not to be defensive, but really trying to use those listening skills can be maybe the most useful, because we're triggered too. Everybody is, right? And understanding that. But Sheila, you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, thank you. This is great. This is wonderful. Thank you, everybody. The thing that I sort of am getting in the back of my head is a gift that I was given a long time ago. And it had to do with when I was at odds with somebody. And instead of coming forth right, bang, 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 you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, this is right, this is whatever. I was given this gift, and the gift was to say to the person, you might not like what I have to say, but I would like to say it anyway. It gives the person, I respect the person enough to say that you have a right to be the way you are and to what you are thinking. But I also have a right to say what I have to say. And it opens up the door to both of us talking. The thing that I found when this happens is people don't get upset. People don't get angry at me for saying that, or saying whatever I say. It's the most amazing experience. And I think that in order to be able to do that is to open myself enough to be able to be willing to do that.
That vulnerability again. Yeah. Francis, you had your hand up, but you're muted.
Thank you. I'm kind of overwhelmed. There's so much to digest, and what has just been said. I'm in the middle of a really horrible situation in terms of how it's affecting the people that are involved. It's a social service organization, and originally it was agreed that we needed to focus on, it's Rotary, and International Rotary has actually established that developing better relations, the whole interaction, the whole interaction of and trying to diversify, and the whole issue of equity, and with all good intentions, two members of the committee produced a series of videos, and it antagonized a whole element within the club who said that if we continued with this diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, they were going to leave the club. They felt that they had been wrongly accused, and it was all about Black people accusing white people. And then there was this sort of breakout group of those dissenters, if you will, people that disagreed with this whole thing. And so now the club's in this divisive. It reminds me of what's going on nationally. And I really liked hearing, what you could say initially, because we can talk about teaching ourselves to listen, but you have to hear, there has to be something to hear. And if they won't talk, if they won't participate, except in a divisive way, I don't know how to begin. We've talked about trying to get together and, and listen and have people speak, but several of them, say, well, that's useless. It won't do any good. And I'm like, if they do come, what's a beginning, opening way to set the mood, to at least establish somehow with them that there are people there that want to listen.
That's a really good point. And, both of Karen and Debbie have participated in a lot of healing circles. And that seems to me like it's a really good tool.
There's healing circles, sometimes called restorative circles, that are taught through the Dispute Resolution Center. And Akuyea and I have been part of those in the community, leading those circles. And a good way to start is it creates a space where there's not a hierarchy. So you're in a circle, even if you're on Zoom, you have an order, nobody speaks over you or responds, but you start with, a nice poem or some music to set the atmosphere. And then you have a series of a few questions, and everybody gets a chance to answer the question uninterrupted. And so it can be an easy one to begin with, to kind of get people warmed up. And then you could get into, like, what do you appreciate about the Rotary Club? That might be a good one to start with, to set the mood in general. And, anyhow, something, and then the next question could be something like, what is grieving you? I don't know. I'm just coming up, and then ending with something that's a little bit more positive, like, what would you personally like to do to make an improvement? I don't know, something that's just comes off the cuff there.
But when you say the very first
You
one,
probably would want somebody who has done a circle before.
when you said the first question should be easier, should it be something like, sometimes I've been in circles where the first question is something really feel almost random, in that it's like, are you loving the rain, or something about,
Right. It could be really simple, some kind of icebreaker.
yeah,
In that way.
that
Mhm.
isn't really directly connected to the issue that's so challenging. And maybe that's a good way.
Mhm.
Akuyea, I don't know if you were able to follow some of that while you were reconnecting with us, but we're talking about healing circles as a way to bring a group back into some kind of unity. And
Yes.
you've certainly done your share of those. And do you have some suggestions about how to get started?
Well, yes, you always want to make the ask, those that are willing to step into the healing circle, because it can't be a forced thing. They have to be willing to step into wanting to hear one another and have a heart to hear one. I think when there's so much division and disruption and all of those things, it brings in a total different element than what the circle was intended to be. And the healing is intended to do, and what the peacemaking is intended for. So you want like-minded people that are ready to move into that. And I think as those that are willing come together and being able to have those conversations, that those that have relationships with those ones that are still in conflict, they can hear from them and want to be able to begin to come alongside and connect with others. Because sometimes my healing might not come, the healing might not come from me. It might come from someone else that has a relationship and an impact, or, have that type of bond with the others that are in conflict. And that's what I've learned over the years, is that sometimes even when we set the table for conflict resolution and for peacemaking and for reconciliation, sometimes it's the grandma that was in the midst of it that can prick the heart of her children and her grandchildren to be able to step into their healing. It could be the individual that has that relational significant that can impact and really reach them when someone else can't.
Oh, this makes me remember the incredible conversation we had about becoming elders a few weeks ago, where I feel like it's up to us to create this elder culture, a healthy, kind,
Yes.
peacemaking elder culture.
Yes.
And gathering those skills and being the examples is, part of the task for this chapter of our lives. And you're right that, the relationship is what so much of it depends on, because I think it's the trust and vulnerability issue again, right? That why should somebody trust me if they don't know anything about me, right? And why would somebody be vulnerable if they don't feel safe? So creating that feeling of safe space, you're not here to be accused, you're not here to have your mind changed,
Yeah.
but you're here to be heard. That is a pretty deep message if it gets heard. I know that, Francis, there's a lot of situations where there's a kind of pushback against some of the inclusion and diversity trainings that are being offered or given. And sometimes I think it's partly from that feeling of I'm being accused, or like you're carrying ancient guilt. I didn't do that. It wasn't me, it was my ancestors or whose ancestors or whatever. But I think that that extreme defensiveness is not uncommon. And it sounds to me like both Debby and Akuyea have really figured out some good ways to get past the defensiveness. Debby, can you say a little bit about that? Like when you go into a situation where people are very defensive, is there a good way to diffuse some of that?
I don't know if this sounds too, I don't know, esoteric or woo-woo, but even the police department, when they did a de-escalation training, they talked about, after 2-hour training, it was towards the end of de-escalating a situation, that they would breathe. And I was shocked because he kind of made fun of it as being sort of like, oh, this is, like a yoga thing, but yet this was the police teaching de-escalation. And how when you get into a calm place and breathe or whatever it takes, it affects another body next to you. And so that's one way that I, practice or try to work at de-escalating. But that kind of situation, it actually works. Our energy bodies relate to each other. And so hope that's not too weird to say.
Not at all. That's not weird at all.
Yeah.
Breathing together is part of our shared human.
It is. And our shared energy field, the atmosphere we create around ourselves and together makes a difference.
Oh,
it's real.
Yeah.
It's real.
You can walk into a room and know if somebody's angry in that room, whether you even heard a word about it, right? And in the same way, if you can make yourself be peaceful, that does affect other people. It's not, I don't know what it is.
Or in a circle, if you have at least a couple people peaceful and they're interspersed, that makes a big difference too.
They're like the peace anchors.
Exactly.
Well, I'm glad, Debby, that you said that because, body language plays a huge role in peacemaking. Whether you're sitting there like this and your face is all tore up like this and you got all of this going on in your forehead, and then all of that in your voice, and whether you receive it or not, I mean, all of those things really play a huge role in the peacemaking process, because a soft answer will even turn away wrath.
Right.
We know that. And so when we're speaking, we can't come with all of that in our voice and in our tone to be able to get across, because I'm angry right now. So you're going to know I'm angry right now. But how do we diffuse that with how we respond in our answer? A soft answer will turn away a lot of that and will calm down. It'll calm down the environment, And so these are tools that we can actually use when we get in and you find yourself in hostile environments and situations, to be able to move with a place of peace.
Well, would you be willing to tell that story a little bit about when you were in the march and there was that young guy with a gun and you went over and started talking to him? Because that story, that was pretty amazing.
Well, yeah, we were in the midst of all of the protests with George Floyd, and we were on the Manette, and the community was coming, and we had supremacists that was riding in their trucks, had their signs, and we had community that was out. We had all our young people, our elders, and entire community that had come out to engage in how do we step into peacemaking and justice, because that's what it was more about for us, was that we knew that our community and our nation was in a place of division and turmoil and anger and bitterness. But how do we begin to change that environment and unify and strengthen our community to stand for justice in a peaceful way, that we're calling our community to move in a way that would diffuse all of this, anger and things. And as we were protesting and standing for justice on that day, we were confronted many times with those that push back and those that came to what I would call evoke more division and evoke more violence and evoke more bitterness and anger. And there were young gentlemen that came armed with their rifles and their weapons strapped on their backs, and they were very visible. They came in to cause the disruption. And as they were on the manette, I said, oh, let me see what all of this is about. And so I walked up to the young men, two of them that was carrying, and I introduced myself. I said, hi, I'm so glad that you guys came, and I'm glad that you're here. And then I asked them, but why would you want to bring weapons to an event? We've got children here, and we've got our elders, our family members, and just begin to talk to them as we crossed the Manette Bridge, and saying, oh, they were like, at first they were like, oh, we got the right. And I said, yeah, we do. We have those rights, but what type of things do you think you're evoking, by bringing the weapons and coming and stirring up more anger and bitterness? And spoke to the young men, and then the young men were responding back to me. And then I was like, well, does your mother even know you out here doing this? I don't think your mom would be happy if she knew that you were out here and this was what you were engaged in, and begin to talk to them. And they were very respectful. Their tone subsided as we walked across the bridge. And by the time we got to the other end of the bridge, they said that they were leaving. And I hope I made them, I pricked their conscience and made them ashamed to have been there to evoke violence. Sometimes you gotta prick some people's conscience and speak some truth to them and ask them some straight up questions, what their intent was when they came to participate. And then we were on an erase call one night, and one of the participants there said that was her brother, and his whole life was changed that day. And so sometimes it's connecting and just having enough courage to have a conversation and ask some real good questions as to what they really wanted to do on that day. What were they there to cause disruption and violence? What were they concerned about? What was going on in our nation? And having conversations like that. And I had no clue, that the conversation would have really impacted the young men like that.
Well, what I remember from that was that the woman who did show up at that erase meeting also said, my mom wanted to tell whoever that was, you're the only person he's ever listened to in his whole life.
That's right.
But I thought, oh, I wonder if you're the only person who actually listened to him that deep in his whole life.
That's right.
Maybe
That's right.
so, right?
That's right. That's right.
That was really a moving experience.
It really was. It was for me as well. But one of the things that I'm grateful and thankful for, I served our nation in the military, and I'm not fearful of weapons. I'm very familiar with weaponry and guns and armory and all of those things. So I wasn't intimidated that they were carrying.
Which is pretty impressive, I gotta say, because I find that intimidating. And Debbie, you had not a sort of similar experience. Can you say a little about that?
Oh, yeah, it was on the Manette Bridge too. And I have to say, I was intimidated. But I was leaving a march there. What was it? Building bridges, not walls, many years ago. And there was a young man it was at the end of the march, but he was coming with a huge Confederate flag, and I was leaving, and I passed him, but I went back, going to the car. I'm like, no, I told my husband, I need to go back and talk to him. And so I went up to him, not having a clue what I was going to say. And I just said, are you open for a conversation? He said, yeah. And then I'm like, oh, now what am I going to say? And so I just started, because I had to like center myself. I started saying, well, I have like constriction in my belly and my heart's tight. And I'm like, because I was doing my grounding, but aloud, because that's what I needed to kind of do at the moment, whatever. And he's like, just go ahead. And I said, can you tell me about your flag? And he began to tell about his flag, what it means to him. And he goes, I know what people think and blah, blah, blah. And he talked about freedom. And I'd say, okay, so it sounds like freedom is really important to you. Yep. And then he's just started talking about where he was from. And he was fairly new to the region. He was probably in his, a younger man. And how, where he's from, people are, his families get together and community is important. And nobody is nice to him here. And so I'm like, wow, it sounds like you might be kind of lonely. He said, yeah, I am. And, and you have a real sense of community and family. And, he was from the South, from, can't remember, Georgia, I think. And and we just started talking about community and how important that is and how he doesn't have that here. And then he asked me about my sign, which was interesting. It's like, so we talked about my sign and I asked him what he thought it meant. And then the conversation went on and I said, well, why did you come to this march? And he said, well, I came here to be rude. And I'm like, well, I'm not experiencing you as rude. What's the deal? And he said, well, that guy talked to me and you talked to me and I don't feel like being rude anymore. And I was with my husband and I was like, attentive to him and, just heart to heart, head to eyes. And I didn't even notice, but after we left, then at the end he said, well, what is this building bridges, not walls mean anyhow? And I said, to me, it's what you and I are doing right now. And we shook hands and we left. And my husband said, did you see his flag at the end? I'm like, no, I didn't see his flag. He said it was all rolled up and behind his back by the end of the conversation. And that was just like, I don't know, to me, it was one of my better experiences of actually practicing compassionate listening in a difficult situation. I'd never seen a Confederate flag that close. So it was like, I was, practicing, but to see how something can shift. I really did not try to talk him out of, I did not try to convince him his flag was wrong or anything. But something shifted, and it shifted in me too, because I no longer have a judgment of every young man that looks like that. I'm not condoning any behavior or anything, but yeah, so there was a little more love that grew in the world, maybe. I hope.
But that's so interesting that you learned as much, or you gained as much.
Yeah. The judgments around people that, what I took away is he was a lonely young man and he was trying to get some attention. And, people at the core of our existence, I think we all as human beings have very similar feelings. And that's how I gain a connection with people. I'm like, oh, I can relate to you because I've been lonely too, And so then I could have my heart completely open when I sensed into that and could hear him more, even deeper in a way. So, yeah, I don't know. It touched my heart in a weird sort of way, I have to say.
Yeah.
Some people will judge that I went and listened to a person with a Confederate flag as if, why are you giving him any attention? And I understand that too, but I don't know. It's sort of how to break down some of these barriers, as Akuyea say, breaking down the barriers. So,
well, and as you said, you were building a bridge instead of a wall, right? And that man was willing to walk across the bridge and meet you there, which is beautiful, right?
yeah.
Francis, you got your hand up.
This is a little off this, but first of all, I want to thank you for both of you for sharing those inspiring stories, because I'm not sure I would not be intimidated to approach some carrying, but remembering your stories might give me a little more backbone than I would have had before. But I just want to say, earlier you were talking about beginning with questions and compassionate listening sessions. Years ago, when I was still working, our company, the Seattle Times, had some training sessions for reporters and managers about identifying with people in the community and being able, there has been some criticism that the Times hadn't covered certain areas, certain communities. And in fact, I was happy to see that they're now finally correcting that in terms of the newspaper. But in this one session, the coordinator, the workshop leader, started it out with this question. I want to know what each of you is will absolutely refuse to be wrong about. What is it you want, or what is it you believe, I should say, that you will absolutely refuse to be wrong about? And he, anybody could volunteer if they wanted to. He said, you don't have to answer it out loud, but I want you to think about it. And of course, there were some people that were, eager to say, I won't be wrong about this, or I won't be wrong about that. A lot of it was religious, but some of it was even political. I won't be wrong about being a Republican or a Democrat or whatever. But it's a question that I ask myself a lot lately, because I find myself wanting to, only listen and only hear those newscasts that I agree with. Mm-hmm. And so I literally force myself to watch some of those sources that I don't agree with, but I want to hear what they have to say and, think, maybe there's some things that they are right about. But I don't know what you think about that as a question in one of those sessions, but.
Debbie, do you want to speak to that?
Well, I want to speak to just listening, because sometimes people confuse when you listen to them, they think you're agreeing if you don't disagree.
Yes.
And so for me, it's important to remember within myself that when I'm listening to somebody, it doesn't mean I'm agreeing with them. And there are times I will say that I really would like to listen to you. And I want you to know that I'm listening to you and I may not respond. And it doesn't mean I'm agreeing with you. Just because it's almost an assumed thing, I think, that people think you're going to agree with them if you don't respond, because it's so unusual to not jump in there and respond right away and disagree or give your opinion. So anyhow, that's just came to mind as you were speaking.
Karen, do you want to speak to that?
One of the things I like that question that you asked us, Ms. Francis. What I won't be wrong about is showing compassion and kindness. I will not be wrong about that. those are some things that I feel I can never be wrong in showing love and compassion and forgiveness to someone. Those things I stand firm on, that those are foundational principles for humanity, for us to be in a good health and wellness. And you have to lay some of those foundational practices and principles, and lay a strong foundation for them, for our communities and for our societies to be better and do better. And those are the things that I feel I won't be wrong about doing, that I would not be wrong about showing that type of compassion to humanity.
You know, I just recently read an account that I had read years ago and sort of forgotten about, of a young Quaker man who was part of the Freedom Riders, and they were being trained in peace techniques by John Deere, Dear, not the tractor dude, but but he was at one of the counters in the soda count, fountain counters, and heard somebody come up behind him and say, "I'm gonna kill you," and he kind of turned over around, and this guy had a knife like right at his back. He said, "I'm going to plunge this into your heart." And this young man who was in his 20s said, "Do what you must do, but I will try to love you the best I can, even if whatever happens." And the guy, he said, just looked super shocked and then put the knife back and then walked away. And I remember the first time I heard it, I was pretty young, and I was like, dude, I don't think I could do that. But I think that is like loving all the way, right? It's like, if you need to kill me, I guess you will, but I will try my best to be a loving person to you. That's really a strong position. I don't, but what it did was, like you said, it turned away wrath, right?
Turns away wrath.
It really
It
did.
really does. I can't, I cannot stress that enough, that if we're going to combat all of the hatred, the anger, the bitterness, that we have to combat it with love, kindness, compassion, forgiveness, and all of those foundational things that will transform those lives. You have to have something that would make the impact to change a life. And love is the most powerful thing to transform lives. Kindness and compassion, even when they know within themselves they don't deserve it, can transform a heart and a mind. Their heart and minds must be pricked by those qualities, by those things that have the power to change lives. And love is the most powerful thing I know to do that. It's hard to kick up against love. I'm just saying it like that. It's a hard thing to be angry when someone's pouring love out on you and being kind to you and showing compassion to you. It's a difficult thing. But, you got some stony, hardened hearts, but even they can be melted by love.
Well, on that note, I don't think anyone can top that, Karen.
I don't know anything. I've searched, and I don't know any other thing that could do that. The love of a little baby, the love of a grandma, the love of your significant other, the love and kindness that we show one another. I don't know anything else that can transform humanity other than those things.
Well, thank you. That is amazing. And I think this is the most inspiring conversation I've had in a really long time.
This was good. This was food for my soul today, to just be here and fellowship with you all and to be able to have conversations like that. Because if we have more conversations like this, we can change our communities.
Yeah.
If we call
Really
our
can.
community into having conversations like this, and even those that are working in the Rotary, to be able to sit and gleam and hear and be able to process all of what's being said, and to listen in a compassionate way, to hear, because I think these type of formats is non-threatening, that they're here to just share, and we share our stories and share our lives experiences. That in itself can transform the minds, the hearts and the minds of those that are listening.